Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with This Week in Cannabis News from October 25th to the 31st. So before we jump in, if you enjoyed this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And then of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe so that you don't miss any future videos. And then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you're ready. And we're going to start this episode with a CNN business article that actually reports accurately about the cannabis industry. And that's not something you hear very often out of CNN, reporting and accurately in the same sentence. But they do highlight that cannabis is one industry that's actually coming out of the pandemic even stronger. Now, we do know this, but I'm just going to highlight some of what they say here. As despite the global pandemic, discombobulated supply chains, which don't seem to affect cannabis because it's all in the US and domestically done, ballooning inflation, and an ongoing fight to legalize cannabis at the federal level, the cannabis industry in America is flourishing. Sales hit $20 billion in 2020 and are on pace to top $26 billion this year, and are projecting to leapfrog to $45.9 billion by 2025. According to data from Marijuana Business Daily that was shared at MJ BizCon, the industry's annual trade show. The nearly $46 billion in sales would make the cannabis industry larger than the craft beer industry, said Chris Walsh, Chief Executive Officer and President of MJ Biz Daily. And these are potentially conservative numbers with what we see playing out, Walsh said during the kickoff of the three-day event. So keep that in mind. He's saying these are conservative numbers, that they're going to double to $46 billion by 2025. This all depends on how quickly the total addressable market in the U.S. expands, depending on how many states end up reforming their laws sooner than later. But with that said, we know that this industry is flourishing, so just wanted to highlight that. But the waiting game is nothing new for the cannabis industry and us investors. But again, that's what makes this opportunity bigger than most, because this is such a fast-growing industry and the share prices do not reflect that whatsoever. Although it has been growing and expanding in leaps and bounds, its legal process has come in inches. I agree that it's an uphill slog to see federal legalization, but what we're putting on the table is inevitability. Steve Hawkins, CEO of the U.S. Cannabis Council and Executive Director of the Cannabis Policy Project, said during an MJ BizCon panel on federal legalization. When you get to the point when half of the country has legalized for adult use, we have now set the stage for inevitability, and that begins to change the tone and tenor in Washington. But just keep in mind, as investors, we don't need full legalization to see success. We're waiting on that safe harbor language that will allow U.S. investors, U.S. investment firms, and U.S. capital to finally get into this industry without fear of federal prosecution. And while they've done it in the past, they've obviously sold their positions to de-risk, but going forward, they're going to want to get in ahead of the crowd, and that's going to come when Washington does finally take action based on what America wants. But that being said, Illinois cannabis sales hit $1 billion through September, so I wanted to highlight this. Since legalizing, Illinois has sold nearly $1 billion in adult use cannabis sales through September, the Daily Journal reports, riding a 7-month wave of over $100 million per month in sales. September saw $120 million in cannabis sales, bringing the total transactions to $997 million, just under $1 billion. The September figures are an 80% increase over last year, the report says. While National Cannabis Industry Association spokesperson Morgan Fox believes the trend reflects momentum towards the regulated cannabis sphere away from the underground market. And that's what makes this total addressable so big already. There's already a massive market for cannabis. It's just taking what's illegal and bringing it into the legal market. And so that just means that the sales can keep going until the end of this decade. Do not forget that. While the Hill reports reforming cannabis laws before the holidays, a three-pronged approach. So just wanted to highlight this, some interesting takeaways. Legalize and regulate. This is the popular consensus in the United States when it comes to how Congress should reform federal cannabis laws. Straight up, and most of America wants this. We've seen this over and over throughout this year, but put simply, cannabis is popular, Congress is not. Passing cannabis policy reform is something members can do today to increase their favorability among voters of all political ideologies. And there are three abundantly clear paths that Congress could take to comprehensively overhaul our nation's failed experiment with prohibition, each of which would be accomplished before Congress goes to recess. So I want to highlight this. I'm going to go through the appropriations one because this is a different one that I haven't mentioned before, but of course the other options are safe banking and the MORE Act. And two that they didn't mention in here would also be the States Act and then descheduling cannabis from the CSA. I believe those would also have the impact, but we're just going to go through these quickly because appropriations is one that I had not considered, or this is just a new avenue. So since 2014, members of Congress have passed the Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies, CJS, appropriations package with a provision protecting those who engage in the state-sanctioned use and dispensing of medical cannabis from federal prosecution by the Department of Justice. The existing language maintains that federal funds cannot be used to prevent states from implementing their own laws authorizing the use, distribution, possession, or cultivation of medical cannabis. In the previous session of Congress, the House took action to expand these protections. Known as the bipartisan Blumenauer, McClintock, Norton, and Lee Amendment, the House sought to remove the word medical from the current language, thus extending the legal protections to both qualified patients and to adults, as well as those licensed to participate in both the medical and adult use industries. This language passed the House twice, with nearly every Democrat voting in favor and with 25% of the Republican caucus also advancing it. That's it. Imagine that. That's how simple this is. All it takes is the removal of one word from the existing language, and the federal government will be unable to interfere with any state's cannabis legalization program, and they won't be able to go after any investors that choose to invest, or any banks or credit bureau agencies, I don't know the word for that, credit agencies, organizations to also work with these companies. When members of the two chambers come together in the conference committee to iron out the spending details, it would be appropriate for them to expand the existing protections by enacting the Blumenauer, McClintock, Norton, Lee Amendment. That seems so simple a solution, they should not waste that opportunity, but there's a little bit more on safe banking that I just wanted to touch on here down at the bottom. Given that House Armed Services Committee Chairman Adam Smith is a co-sponsor of the bill, and Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Jack Reed represents a medical state which may pass a bill allowing adult use by the end of the year, it would be an appropriate step to take to enact safe banking as swiftly as possible via inclusion in the final NDAA package. Because it is true, we know that without functional banking, these social equity entrepreneurs or minority entrepreneurs are not going to have any opportunity at competing with the big MSOs. And for that reason, it's timely that Marijuana Moment also reports this: Congress should pass cannabis banking as legalization support builds, Black small business owners say. And it's 100% true, because we better take the next step as a victory as opposed to trying to get everything at once and not ending up getting that. And sadly, it just seems like whoever actually runs America, that's what they want, and to delay this as long as possible. But that's why it's so important for the American people to make their noise and make their voices heard. Some key lawmakers and legalization advocates argue that passing cannabis banking reform before justice-focused federal legalization is going to exclusively benefit large companies. But a group of small cannabis business owners aren't buying it, and they're making the case that the incremental policy change could actually help support social equity efforts. Yes, that's true, because it will. It'll give them access to cheaper loans and not predatory 40%, 30% loans because they're dealing with a plant. The U.S. Cannabis Council, USCC, hosted several Black cannabis entrepreneurs at an event titled Unsafe Banking in Cannabis: The Real-Life Impact of Public Safety and Social Equity on Thursday. Participants responded to concerns expressed by Senator Cory Booker and others who revisited advancing legal legislation that simply protects banks that work with state legal cannabis businesses while broader justice-focused legalization is still pending. Steve Hawkins, CEO of USCC, said that while stakeholders are cognizant of the concerns Booker and others have raised, the current lack of banking access for cannabis business is creating a redlining effect that's allowing the largest multi-state operators in the industry to overcome financial hurdles while shutting out smaller companies, particularly those run by people from communities most impacted by cannabis criminalization. We're still forced with the harsh reality that we are denied access to basic financial services, he said. That has posed a significant threat to public safety, as businesses around the country have faced threats because of having to deal specifically with cash. So this highlights exactly what we've been saying over the entire year, that look, as much as the Dems want to delay, they're really doing a disservice to anyone in this industry by not passing SAFE, thinking that they can get more social equity when we know that they don't have the votes. They've had the votes for SAFE since April, and while their inaction is actually what's causing the pressure to build and forcing these small business owners to speak up. And at the same time, it makes the Dems look bad, and it makes the Republicans look even better because they realize SAFE is the next logical incremental step, and it's just the time for it to pass. On to this AMA from Curaleaf. Boris Jordan did hold one on October 28th at 5 p.m., so I would recommend going through this, as it's just very informative, because Boris Jordan is a self-made billionaire, so he's a man that is better to trust than, say, a news reporter on TV or a talking head, because he's actually done this and he understands sort of, more of the processes, and he's actually willing to speak openly because he has FU money and he doesn't really have to listen to anyone, which is the best part. So I just wanted to share some of his answers from the AMA because they do give us the most up-to-date current information from an insider CEO in this industry as opposed to a lobbyist as to when they think SAFE will actually pass given what they're seeing in the circumstances. So is the TSX a viable interim alternative before uplisting to the NASDAQ? Are the TSX and American exchanges looking for similar bona fides like SAFE, or does it vary? Hasn't the tipping point been reached with nearly 40 states offering some kind of cannabis? We believe that passage of SAFE would allow U.S. companies to uplist to the TSX, and depending on the language, possibly also to the U.S. exchanges. So how annoying, because it seems like SAFE should lead to U.S. uplisting. If it won't, why. But at the same time, TSX uplisting again will be the next best step. Regardless, I'll stop blabbering. We believe any federal legislation referencing cannabis will ease the regulatory pressures we currently face throughout the country with banks, investors, and regulators. And as we saw from the Hill article, there are a lot of options that can be done, especially just changing one word. Well, the second question, do you feel safe banking will pass by the end of the year or perhaps early next year? Safe banking has not been removed from the NDAA, which is just very positive to hear because obviously Schumer has to do that, and it's not going to be a good look if he does, and the Republicans are likely going to make him do that publicly. With strong bipartisan support from the Senate for keeping it in there, love to hear that, so there's still a remote chance it could pass this year. Now, this is still speculation, but this is in line with the best case scenario from Brady Cobb, who's a DC lobbyist, that says it could pass by Q4 2021. However, the next best case, which is consistent with what Boris has said over and over, we believe that it will more likely pass in the first half of next year, which would also be in line with what Schumer said on April 20th of 2021, saying that I want cannabis to be descheduled and decriminalized. No, he said decriminalized, but I want cannabis to be decriminalized by this time next year, which would be in line with what Boris has said consistently, April 2022. So just wanted to highlight that because this is sort of the most up-to-date info, but SAFE is still in the NDAA, so that is positive. On to this from Todd Harrison. Eminence sweetens the pot on cannabis bet as industry sees continued growth. So what is Eminence? Well, I wanted to share. Eminence, a prominent fund manager sees a need for cannabis. Wagering that the federal government eventually will legalize cannabis, Eminence Capital, so big hedge fund, has made a basket of cannabis stocks one of its top 10 positions in its two main funds. We believe that the U.S. cannabis industry represents a compelling multi-year investment opportunity with the potential to more than triple our money over the next 5 years, Ricky Sandler, the $7.8 billion equity firm's chief executive and chief investment officer, wrote last week in a third quarter update to investors. It's one of the latest and perhaps most high-profile ventures yet in cannabis investing by hedge funds, and by most accounts, it will not be the last. Love to hear that. As he highlights, state-by-state legislative support is gaining considerable momentum, and bipartisan consumer support for cannabis legalization is at an all-time high. And to highlight, Eminence basket of cannabis stocks includes Green Thumb, Cresco, and Terracin. So thank you, Todd Harrison, for sharing that. We've got another one. This is from Duke of Wall Street, so I just wanted to share this, but mainly he's an experienced Wall Street equity research analyst, they claim. But I love highlighting here, focused on finding multi-baggers. And a multi-bagger is an investment that's not going to grow by 7% or 10% year over year. It's going to get you a 200%, 300%, 400%, 500% return, multiple bagger returns. Obviously, that's the point. That's what a multi-bagger is. But just wanted to highlight that because he sees this industry as where you can find multi-baggers, as do I, and that's really the opportunity that we're holding out for, and that's what this generational opportunity is. But just wanted to highlight some MSO daily snapshots from Duke of Wall Street. Since February, MSOS has been cut in half, whilst EBITDA estimate, so this is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, of top 5 MSOs are up 55.8%. So share prices have been cut in half, while profitability, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, is up 50%. So share prices, price action down 50%, while fundamentals are growing by 50%. Revenue estimates are also up 57% over the same time frame. So again, this is just, all this does is scream opportunity if you've educated yourself on identifying investment fundamentals. On his second one down here, chart showing enterprise value sales multiples 22 sales consensus estimates on March 31st to today. Biggest decliner has been Trulieve, while the best or not as bad has been Terracin. So this is, we can just compare from March 31st, 2021, earlier this year. This is their valuation based on their share price then, and then their current valuations based on their share price now, based on what they're going to make in total revenues in 2022. So that's an interesting visual as well. So again, I didn't end up clicking on this, but as you can see, MSO share price performance goes down while their combined earnings after subtracting all of this keeps going up. And then so lastly, just to highlight down here, and I don't do any technical analysis myself, so I'm just sharing this because it's part of the thread. Any up movement from MSOS, like we saw on NDAA news, has been immediately sold, and the downtrend remains intact. MSOS opened for trading at 24 on September 1st, 2020. Despite election, number of states legalizing, and all other progress, MSOS is quickly approaching a starting point. If that's not opportunity, with one of the fastest growing industries in a U.S. emerging market, I don't know what is. And despite U.S. MSOs generate more revenue and significantly more profitability than Canadian LPs, CGC and Tilray are bigger than all except Curaleaf. I wonder if restrictions on capital flows causes institutional money to use these as a proxy, and what will happen when MSOs eventually uplist. And this is exactly what we're talking about. And so we can look at what the LPs have done in the past, and this gives us reason to believe that the MSOs are going to see significant share price valuation increases once they get the opportunity to either uplist or once there's safe harbor language that allows U.S. investors and U.S. capital to finally invest. But this is just another chart that I wanted to show you. It breaks down U.S. MSOs, their enterprise value, and their current price, and then we've got their performance, revenues, revenue growth, enterprise value to sales, adjusted EBITDA, and enterprise value to EBITDA with 2021 numbers for this current year, 2022 and 2023. So this is another great visual, and you can just compare MSOs to LPs. So you can grab this link below as well if you want to check it out. So big thank you to Duke of Wall Street for sharing this information with us, because ultimately it's just good information to compare with what you know, and what we know is accurate is that this industry is flourishing and growing. And lastly, just wanted to share this from the Dales report, October 27th. Don't know if this is true or not, but we all know this type of chicanery is commonplace in the Canadian public markets. I mean, most people don't know that. I didn't know that when I started investing, but that's something we find out as we continue investing. Makes you wonder whether this is currently happening in the U.S. cannabis names such as GTI, Trulieve, and Air, and more, as the MSOS component uplisting is supremely needed. We know that, but this just goes off of what I showed on Sunday, is that Ontario, the province that I live in Canada, is actually looking at implementing new laws that don't allow, or that make naked short selling illegal, which is obviously one of the potential causes for the sort of fuckery that we're seeing with the share prices, especially on the Canadian Securities Exchange, but also on the over-the-counter in the US. But just to highlight, there's an active IRROC investigation into what appears to be predatory naked shorting algorithm that is run through CIBC House, targeting countless CSE and TSX stocks. The original series of complaints were submitted to IROC by XRX shareholders after it became apparent that CIBC 79, I guess that's their identification number, so that's how they can get found out. House was systematically layering bids and asks and using small orders to downtick the price on low volume. Now, this is something I don't fully understand, so I haven't tried to report on it, but this is something that you can see from multiple MSO investors on Twitter. So I'll try and actually add some links to examples of people trying to call this out below this so that you can check that out for reference. But how ironic, like, the fact that this is actually being exposed and called out and that we're actually seeing action is great. Obviously, it seems late. We would have wanted this earlier, or even implemented last year, but it does highlight that if you make complaints, especially those shareholders or those with money, then things can actually happen and change and get done about them. So to highlight this, it just goes to show that, hopefully this will lead to less manipulation in the share prices. That would be ideal, but at least it's just nice to see that this is being addressed and looked into. So on to some news from the Office of Medical Cannabis Use, published October 29th, 2021, and we can see that they increased their total qualified patient count to 631,660, which is up from 628,277 last week, an increase of 3,383 patients. So it's a good amount of Floridians that are turning to cannabis for their medicine in a single week. While there are no weekly highlights from our new stores, we know that Trulieve did reopen a bunch of formerly branded Harvest stores, and as we can see, all the MSOs that are competing in Florida, we can see the amount of milligrams in THC sold, milligrams of CBD sold, and ounces of smokable flower. And at least for Trulieve, their high watermark for amount of ounces of smokable flower sold is typically a ton, which is 32,000 grams, so they're above that consistently again. But basically, if you're invested in any of these companies, you can check week over week whether they're selling more milligrams or ounces or whether they're selling less, and keep an eye on whether they're increasing their market share in that state. While we move over the first year, Maine banks 60 million adult use cannabis sales with room to grow. That might not sound like a lot, but for a small population, Maine has put in work. So the 9.7 million in adult use cannabis sales Maine banked in September might come in the shadows of current retail behemoths like California, Michigan, and Illinois. That's okay. Maine is their own little spot, and it's still finding its footing. Its adult use sales launched October 9th, 2020, but it's the second smallest state by population to roll out adult use retail. Only Alaska has a smaller in-state customer base. And furthermore, only 10% of municipalities in Maine have opted in and allowed licensed retailers to set up shop. And overall, Maine's adult use sales from October 9th, 2020 through September 2021 surpassed 58.5 million, according to the state's Office of Cannabis Policy. With sales figures from the first 8 days of October 2021 yet to be tallied, Maine's first-year sales figures are fixing to eclipse the 60 million benchmark. And if we just take a look at some of the sales, overall sales figures have remained in an upward trajectory since launch, with the summer spike of 9.4 million in July, representing a 46% increase from June, before topping out at 10.1 million in August, and then sales fell a little bit to 9.7 million in September. So good job, Maine, as you are obviously seeing the benefits of legalizing, and you are continuing to grow and see that upward trajectory that other states have seen as well. While this comes from MJ Biz Daily, Columbia Care partners with boxing great Mike Tyson on cannabis brand. New York-based Columbia Care said Wednesday it plans to launch a new cannabis brand in partnership with former heavyweight boxing champion Mike Tyson. The brand line, which will be called Tyson 2.0, according to a new release, will be sold across Columbia Care's 99 dispensary network in 18 states and will include flower, flower, concentrates, and consumables. So in terms of a celebrity endorsement, this is one I can get behind. Not as big of a fan as the Martha Stewart ones, but still, you got to reach all the different audiences. The line will also be sold wholesale to other retailers as well. And so interesting just to show that they're selling it through their dispensaries, but at the same time, if these are consumer packaged goods, they can sell these to other retailers as well to get more reach. Just goes to show how there's sort of the partnerships also going on between this competitive industry. But good to see as Columbia Care continues to execute. On to some news from marijuana moment, as teen cannabis use is not increasing as more states legalize. Another federal study shows, which is great because it's more data telling us what we already know, but it's good because it will help change the minds of those that have a hard time changing their mind when they learn new information. As youth cannabis use in 2020 did drop amid the pandemic as more states moved to enact legalization, a newly released federal study found. The latest data from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health is yet another example of a federally backed study challenging the prohibitionist narrative that ending cannabis prohibition for adults will lead to increased underage usage. Past year cannabis use for those aged 12 to 17 dipped from 13.2% to 10.1% from 2019 to 2020, the survey conducted by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration found. And even for those in the 18 to 25 age category, past year use dropped from 35.4% to 34.5% in the same time frame. So it's great to see that, yes, we have more data supporting that when you legalize something, the population suddenly doesn't just jump towards it and start consuming it if they didn't do it already. So that's reassuring. You can check out the graph here, but obviously this is just a good study because this is, again, one of those arguments from prohibitionists that holds no weight anymore now that we've tried it. While this one, support for cannabis legalization in Pennsylvania hits a new record high, new poll finds. Well, this is great as lawmakers in Pennsylvania are introducing new legislation to legalize for adult use. So as multiple Pennsylvania lawmakers introduce bills to legalize cannabis, support for reform is at record high according to a new poll. The survey from Franklin and Marshall College found that 60% of Pennsylvania voters back adult use legalization. That's the highest level of support for the issue since the firm started polling people about it in 2006. Back then, just 22% of voters said that they favored legalizing cannabis. Support has nearly tripled in the year since. And it's interesting, for the latest survey released on Thursday, the word recreational was added to the question for the first time. One might assume that including a word that carries some stigma would result in lower support, but it actually increased by 1 percentage point since the previous poll was conducted in March. That said, the opposition also ticked up 2 percentage points, while those saying they don't know how they feel about the issue dropped by the same margin. While the poll, which involved interviews with 522 registered voters and was conducted typo there, October 18th to 24th, comes as legislators ramp up efforts to get legalization enacted in the state. But this is an example of a democratic state functioning because Pennsylvania lawmakers are listening to the public, and if the public wants legalization, lawmakers are creating that legalization for what the public wants. So that's good to see. While Maryland lawmakers are discussing expunging cannabis records as part of legalization plan for 2022. So while this is early and they're not doing anything yet, it's nice to see that their lawmakers are actually working towards being proactive on the issue as opposed to reactive and waiting. So just to highlight, Morrissey laid out the 3 routes that the legislator could take up to eliminate prior cannabis charges. The first is expungement, which completely removes information about a case from court and police records. Shielding, which occurs when a judge grants a request to keep records relating to the conviction of certain crimes from public view, or sealing, which happens when someone facing certain charges asks a judge to limit access to their records for a reason the judge finds compelling. So if the legislature takes the expungement route, Morrissey said that the judiciary estimated that it would take several hundred additional clerks to get through millions of case records over a several-year period. And what does this mean? Jobs for people in Maryland. It's not all bad when we end cannabis prohibition. So good to highlight that. Then again, Maryland is trying to be proactive as opposed to reactive. And so just to highlight this from Leafly, these states could legalize cannabis next in 2022. So I'm not going to read all of this, but I'm just going to go through it and pause. Maryland, you could read more if you want about their efforts there. Missouri, you can pause to read as well. Oklahoma, pause to read if you wish. Ohio, this one's a little bit longer, so in snippets you can pause to read. Arkansas, Pennsylvania, another one, and Florida. So a lot of states can be taking action in the next year. And as the momentum and pressure builds, more likely that they're going to want to get it done because, as we've seen from highlighting all the stories, prohibition actually does bring a lot of benefits, a lot more good than harm to states as well. So lastly, interesting facts about the cannabis industry. And these are all true. So just wanted to highlight them because, again, if you're not aware or whether you're new to the channel, cannabis and the industry is creating jobs. There are many consumption methods. It is growing fast. Many states have legalized. Many states are still going to legalize. And this is where the big opportunity is because the total addressable market can only expand as quickly as states reform their laws. While policing cannabis is expensive, that's been proven and it has not been effective. The black market still is worth a lot, and that also means that sales that are in the black market can be brought into the legal market through efforts of state reform, creating legalized adult use markets and regulating them. So lastly, this one is also from Marijuana Moment, but Italian activists turned in more than 500,000 signatures for cannabis and psilocybin referendum. So good job, Italy. Love to hear this, as activists on Thursday formally turned in about 630,000 signatures for a referendum to legalize the personal cultivation of cannabis and other psychoactive plants and fungi like psilocybin mushrooms. The referendum questions was first filed in September, and the reform campaign has now submitted more than 500,000 signatures that they hope will qualify the measure to go before the nation's voters in early 2022. Part of the reason activists were able to gather that volume of signatures so quickly is a policy change that allowed them to collect signatures online instead of in person only. So yeah, I imagine that makes it a lot easier, and Italians are not going to complain about that either. So great job, Italy. Hopefully we have some more news to share about this in the future, but just wanted to share this as this is a victory for the plant in another European nation. And this lastly from NORML, federal enact the Safe Banking Act as part of the NDAA. So this is a call to keeping safe in the NDAA, from my understanding, from NORML.org. So if you are American, you can put your information here and you can start writing as to why you believe it's fair to keep safe in the NDAA, and I'll give you some help here. Obviously, it will protect Americans that work in the cannabis industry from armed robberies and the threat of assault, because they have to deal in cash, and that makes them targets for armed robberies. At the same time, it will allow these banks to work with cannabis businesses, so it will bring down the cost of capital for everybody, large MSOs and small mom and pop entrepreneurs in any state that wants to, take on this opportunity and become an entrepreneur and start a business to support their family. So lots of good comes from this. So please, if you have not yet, consider joining the cause and writing to your local representative and asking them to keep Safe Banking Act in the NDAA, because that is a big victory that has a chance still of happening. And obviously, as mentioned before, November is a big month. We're going to see this all unwind. And before I forget as well, MSO earnings do start on November 9th, at least for the Tier 1 MSOs. So that's something to look forward to, less than 10 days away. There's going to be a lot happening this month, and I can't wait to share all of the news with you. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or concerns, and I'd be happy to address them. Besides that, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Wednesday for a midweek update. Have a great day, everybody.